You think my daughter would waste her future on someone like you? Go back to wherever it is people like you come from. You don't belong at this table." Renata Voss said it the way people say things they have rehearsed. So many times they no longer hear how they sound. She said it in front of her husband, her daughter, 2 family friends, and a dining room full of candles that cost more per hour than Theo Bain earned in a shift. Then she picked up her wine glass, turned back to her guests, and resumed the conversation as if he had already left. He had not left yet. He stood there for 3 more seconds, which was 2 seconds longer than anyone expected, and in those 3 seconds he looked at her daughter, Cassie, across the table. Cassie was 22 and sitting very still with her hands flat on the white cloth and her eyes on the centerpiece, and she did not look up. Theo left. He walked down the long driveway of the Voss estate in Savannah, Georgia, with the collar of his second-hand blazer turned against the November air. And he did not look back because there was nothing behind him worth the turn of his head. He had spent the cab ride over telling himself the evening would go fine. It had not gone fine. He was 20 years old, a sophomore at Georgia Southern on a partial scholarship, working 30 hours a week at a logistics warehouse south of the city, and he had been in love with Cassie Voss for 8 months, and now it was done. He remembered the cold of the pavement through his shoes. He remembered thinking that the jasmine near the gate smelled too good for a night this bad. He remembered deciding, somewhere between the gate and the street, that he would not let this be the last chapter of anything. 4 years later, he owned the building that supplied the software running the Voss family's entire shipping operation. They didn't know it yet. Theo came back to Savannah in March, driving himself in a rented sedan that was not the nicest car he had access to. That was a deliberate choice. He had learned early that the most dangerous thing a man could do was arrive looking like what he had become before the moment he needed it. He checked into a mid-range hotel on the edge of the historic district, paid cash at the desk, and spent the first evening walking the waterfront the way he used to walk it when he was broke, and the river was the one thing in the city that didn't cost anything to look at. He was not broke now. What Theo had built in 4 years was not the kind of story people told cleanly, because it had not been clean. It had started with a problem he noticed at the warehouse, a gap in how freight carriers communicated across handoff points that cost every company he'd ever worked for hours of reconciliation time every single week. He had written the fix in a notebook during his lunch breaks, then in code on a borrowed laptop at the campus library, then in a proper software suite once he had convinced a professor to let him use the department's development environment after hours. The first licensing deal had come when he was 21. The second, bigger one had come 8 months after that. By 23, Theo Bain had a company with 6 employees and a patent that half the logistics firms on the eastern seaboard were paying to use. By 24, he had restructured the company, taken on a partner named David Marsh, a sharp-eyed attorney from Atlanta who had been with him since the second deal, and quietly begun acquiring minority stakes in distressed freight tech firms across the Southeast. He did it through a holding company with a name that meant nothing to anyone who heard it. That was also deliberate. One of those firms had a software integration contract with Voss Logistics. The family enterprise Dale Coburn had spent 30 years building for Renata Voss and now ran as her operations director. The contract was not large on its own, but it was the thread, and Theo had been patient with threads. He had not come to Savannah to pull it, not immediately. He had come because the annual freight industry conference was being held at a hotel 2 blocks from the Voss family's downtown office, and because Theo believed in standing close enough to a thing to smell it before you decided what to do with it. He registered under his company name, attended the first morning session, and was standing at the edge of the coffee station during the mid-morning break when he saw her. Cassie Voss stood across the room in a gray blazer with a lanyard around her neck and a tablet under her arm, talking to 2 men Theo recognized as regional carrier reps. She was not the girl from the dinner table. She was sharper now, more practiced, the kind of compose that comes from years of being given responsibility without being given authority. which was a specific kind of exhausting that Theo understood from the other direction. She had her mother's posture and none of her mother's cruelty, which Theo had always believed was a choice she made every single day. She saw him a moment later. Across the room, through the noise of 100 conversations, she went still. He watched her process it, the rented sedan, the conference badge, the suit that fit him correctly, not expensively, correctly, which to someone who had grown up in money was a more specific signal than expense. He watched her do what Cassie always did when something surprised her, which was to finish the sentence she was already in before responding to the new information. She excused herself from the carrier reps and walked toward him. He did not go to meet her. Theo. She said it carefully. The way you say the name of something you're not sure is real. Cassie. He said it the same way she had said his, evenly, without the weight of everything underneath it, and he watched that land. You're here for the conference. Same as you. You're in logistics? He looked at his badge, then back at her. Something like that. She almost smiled and stopped herself. How long are you in town? Few days. A man in a conference polo appeared at her elbow, said something low about a panel starting, and Cassie glanced at him and then back at Theo, with the expression of someone who has just run out of time to ask the thing they actually wanted to ask. I'll find you later, she said. She did not find him that day. He had not expected her to. What Theo did instead was attend a panel on supply chain integration and sit 3 rows behind Dale Coburn, who presented a 15-minute overview of Voss Logistics Infrastructure Modernization Roadmap with the confidence of a man who did not know how thin the ice under it was. Theo listened to every word. He took no notes because he did not need to. He already knew the roadmap better than Coburn did. He had paid someone very good at their job to help him understand it. That evening, a car picked Theo up from the hotel and took him to a building on the south side of the city that looked like a storage facility and was, in fact, the regional office of his holding company's most recent acquisition, the very logistic software firm whose contract threaded directly into Voss Logistics' operating system. He met with the firm's new technical director, a precise woman named Giselle Harmon, who had transferred in from the Atlanta office and who reported to Theo through 2 layers of structure designed to keep his name off the public record. How dependent are they? Theo asked. Completely, Giselle said. They rebuilt their dispatch and carrier routing on top of our platform 18 months ago. Switching costs would be prohibitive. We're not just integrated, we're load-bearing. Theo sat with that. Load-bearing was a word he had started to think about differently in the last year, since he'd spent a month doing carpentry work in a city where old buildings taught you things about structure that no business school ever would. I don't want them to know we hold the contract, he said. Keep everything running exactly as it is. If there are service issues, resolve them faster than normal. I don't want them to have a single complaint about this product. Giselle looked at him with the expression of someone who had stopped being surprised by his instructions, but had not stopped finding them interesting. You're protecting them. I'm being precise, Theo said. There's a difference. He was not entirely sure he believed himself, but it was the answer that fit the plan, and, for now, the plan was the only anchor he had. The second time he saw Cassie was not at the conference. It was at a coffee shop near Forsyth Park on the 3rd morning, the kind of place that had been there since before either of them was born, where the ceiling fans moved slow and the light came in yellow and warm through old glass. He was reading through quarterly reports on his phone when she sat down across from him without asking. I looked you up, she said. He set the phone down. What did you find? Not much. Your company name, 2 press mentions, a patent filing. She had her own coffee already, which meant she had planned this. You're harder to find than you should be. I'm exactly as hard to find as I mean to be. She looked at him steadily. You're not here for the conference. I'm here for the conference, he said. And some other things. Does one of those other things involve my family's company? He had thought about this moment for 4 years, in the abstract and then in specifics, and he had prepared a half-dozen versions of this answer. He looked at Cassie Voss across a small table in a coffee shop, Where they had once split a blueberry scone on the afternoon, she told him she loved him, and every prepared version went quiet. "I need to tell you something," he said, "but not here and not yet. There's something I have to handle first, and I want to handle it honestly, and the way I handle it is going to depend on you, on me, on whether you're still the person I think you are." She was quiet for a moment. "That's not a fair thing to say to someone." "No," he agreed. "It's not." He looked at his coffee. "What I'm going to ask is harder. I need a few more days, and I need you to trust that what I'm doing is not going to hurt you." "What about my mother?" He looked up. "That depends on your mother." Cassie left the coffee shop without agreeing or disagreeing, which, in his experience, was the way she said yes to things she wasn't sure about yet. He watched her go and let himself feel, for just a moment, the full weight of what he was carrying. The fund, the contract, the 4 years, the way all of it had been aimed like an arrow at one specific target and had somehow, without his consent, begun to point somewhere else entirely. Renata Voss ran her family's logistics company the way she ran everything, from the front of the room, with complete conviction that the room agreed with her before she checked. She was 61 years old, the daughter of a man who had built Voss Logistics out of 2 leased trucks and a route contract in 1974, and she had grown the company herself through relationships, through will, and through the specific kind of social intelligence that substitutes for structural thinking when things are going well and fails expensively when they are not. Things were not going as well as she believed. Theo had spent the last year learning the exact shape of the gap between what Renata thought her company was and what it actually was. The Voss operation was profitable, but it was over-reliant on 3 major accounts that had been quietly shopping alternatives for 18 months. Its software infrastructure was entirely dependent on a platform Renata did not know, was now controlled by an entity she had never heard of. Its debt had been structured by a banking relationship that was coming due for renegotiation in 11 weeks. And Dale Coburn, who managed all of this, had been quietly redirecting vendor referral fees into a consulting LLC that existed primarily to put money in his own pocket. Theo had not discovered the Coburn issue intentionally. He had been reviewing the firm's integration documentation and found a billing pattern that made no geometric sense till it did. And then it made a very specific and expensive kind of sense. He had sat on it for 3 weeks trying to decide what to do with it, because what he did with it would determine everything else. He could do nothing. Let Coburn keep the hand in the cookie jar. The Voss company's undisclosure would become his when the debt came due, and Renata Voss would spend her autumn watching her life's inheritance dissolve into receivership. That was what he had come for. That was the architecture he had built across 4 years, patient and invisible, and it would work exactly as designed. The problem was Cassie. Cassie had been brought in 18 months ago to lead the company's technology partnerships, which meant that Cassie's name was on the contract documents. When Coburn's skimming came out, and it would come out the moment anyone looked, the liability would fall on the project manager of record. Not on Coburn, not on Renata. On Cassie, who had signed the forms she was handed without being shown what was inside them, the way her mother had always handed her things to sign. Theo sat in his hotel room and looked at the ceiling for a long time the night he understood this. He wrote the report the next morning. It took him 3 hours, which was faster than it should have taken, because the numbers had always come easily to him, and because he had been half writing it in his head since the night he found the billing pattern. He laid out every discrepancy, every shell vendor, every referral fee that had somehow routed to an entity with Coburn's initials in its registration. He made the pattern undeniable, the way you make a thing undeniable when you want it to be impossible to dismiss. He printed it and slid it under Cassie's hotel room door that evening. On the outside of the envelope in his own handwriting, he wrote 2 words, "Start here." She called him 40 minutes later. Her voice was steady, which was the thing about Cassie that had always told him the most. "This is Dale," she said. "Yes. How long have you known?" 3 weeks, and you just sat on it. I was figuring out what to do with it. You could have gone to my mother. Your mother would have buried it." A pause. "Probably. Another pause. Longer. What do you want me to do with this? Whatever you decide to do, Theo said. That part isn't mine. She hung up. He set the phone down and looked out at the Savannah night and thought about the way a plan feels when it starts to breathe differently than you designed it to. Cassie took 4 days. In those 4 days, she did not contact him. She came and went from the conference sessions with the same controlled composure she had always worn in public, and he watched her from a distance, the way he had watched her. Across her mother's dinner table 4 years ago, the girl trying to figure out how much of herself she was allowed to take up in a room that had been sized for someone else. On the 5th day, she requested an emergency meeting with Voss Logistics' outside auditor. She had not gone to Renata first. She had not asked Coburn for an explanation. She had built her own case from the documents Theo had handed her, and from the company's own records, which she had every right to access as Technology Partnerships Director, and which she had apparently been doing quietly for 4 days without telling a soul. She was not taking his word for it. She was doing what a serious person does, which is verify before they strike and strike when they're certain. Theo heard about the audit request through David Marsh, who heard about it through a contact in the building. He sat with the information for a long moment and felt something he had not budgeted for. A specific, quiet pride that had nothing to do with his plan. Renata found out about the audit request within the hour. She did what frightened people with power always do. She moved to control the story before anyone else could tell it. She called Cassie into her office and told her, in a voice that left no room for argument, that the audit request was being withdrawn, that internal concerns were handled internally, and that Cassie's role in the company had always been advisory rather than executive, which was the first time in 18 months she had described it that way. Cassie told her mother that the request had already been submitted and that she had no authority to withdraw it unilaterally. Renata told her that she had every authority over everything in this company and always would. Cassie told her she would see her at the board meeting. Theo heard about this too. He heard it from Cassie herself, who texted him 2 words that evening. "It started," he called David Marsh. "How are we on the position?" 44% of the voting interest, David said. "We're short. We need 3 board members to hold the line, and 2 of them were put there by Renata personally. What's the timing on the debt renegotiation?" 11 weeks. "But if Renata panics, she'll move the board meeting up. She'll try to restructure before we can consolidate." "She's already panicking," Theo said. He was right. Renata called an emergency board meeting for the following Monday morning. She did not tell Cassie what was on the agenda. She spent the weekend making phone calls to every board member she had appointed, calling in every favor in a network she had spent 30 years cultivating. And by Sunday evening, she believed she had the room. She intended to use the meeting to centralize all vendor and partnership authority back to operations, which would remove Cassie's ability to pursue the audit, neutralize the outside auditor's standing, and let Renata manage the Coburn situation quietly and on her own terms. She also intended, though she did not put this in any document, to have Cassie removed from the technology partnership's role entirely. Not punished. Renata did not think of it as punishment. She thought of it as protection, the same way she had thought of the dinner 4 years ago, that she was removing her daughter from a situation that was getting complicated before it became dangerous. She had been wrong 4 years ago, too. She had not yet learned that. Theo got the call at 5:30 Monday morning. David's voice was clipped and fast. "She moved the meeting to 9. I've confirmed the agenda. She's going after Cassie's role in the audit." Theo was already dressed. He had been awake since 4. "Tell the board I'm coming," he said. He had spent 4 years making sure no one in Savannah's business community could connect his name to the holding company, to the logistics firm, to the Voss contract. To walk into that boardroom was to end all of it, to hand Renata Voss a map she could use against him, and to accept that Cassie, watching him reveal across a boardroom table everything he had hidden from her through every honest moment they had shared in the last 2 weeks, might conclude that none of it had been real. He sat in the back of the car David had sent and understood. staring at the pre-dawn streets of Savannah, that the secret had come due, and that there was no version of paying it that did not cost him something. He went anyway. The Voss family board met in a fourth-floor conference room in the building Dale Coburn ran his department from, which was itself a small irony, Theo noted and filed away. Renata was already seated at the head of the table when he arrived, and she had arranged the room the way she arranged everything, efficiently and in her own favor. The faces around the table were the faces of people who had been doing business with her family for 15 or 20 years, and who had learned that agreeing with Renata Voss was easier than the alternative. Coburn sat to her right, looking like a man who was hoping very hard that a meeting called for one reason was not secretly about him. Cassie sat alone at the far end of the table with a single folder in front of her and no visible allies. She looked at Theo when he came through the door, and the look held about 300 different things, and he could not stop to address any of them. Renata looked at him with the particular expression of a woman who has not been surprised in a long time and does not enjoy starting now. "This meeting," she said, "is closed to outside parties. Good morning, Mrs. Voss." The voice behind him was David's, measured and deliberate. David set a folio on the table and opened it without hurry. "My name is David Marsh. I represent the controlling interest in the entities that hold Voss Logistics' outstanding technology contracts and a significant portion of its restructured debt instruments. My client asked me to be president this morning. I'd recommend the board hear what I have to say before it votes on anything." Renata's jaw tightened. "I don't know who sent you, Mr. Marsh, but whatever you're selling, I'm not selling anything." David turned a page in the folio. "I'm informing this board of a material fact it appears to be unaware of. As of last week, the holding company I represent controls 44% of the voting interest in this enterprise." He laid the documents flat. "That is the largest single position at this table. It exceeds the block Mrs. Voss assembled over the weekend, which I'm told tops out at 31%. Any resolution this board passes this morning passes or fails at my client's discretion." The room went very quiet. Theo heard Renata breathe. "Who," she said slowly, "is your client?" "You've met him," David said, 4 years ago, at your dinner table." Theo stepped forward. He did not look at Cassie yet because he could not afford to. He looked at Renata Voss, at the woman he had been aimed at for 4 years, and for a moment he just let her look back at him and do the arithmetic she had built her whole life on and watch it fail. "You had me walk to the gate," he said. "You told me to go back to wherever people like me came from. I came back." He let that sit for a moment. "I built it myself. Every dollar, every contract, starting the week after you told me I would never be enough for your table. The fund, the platform, the integration contract your company runs on, that's all mine. I didn't come here with someone behind me. I am the someone." He turned to the board. "I'm calling a vote. 2 items. First, the resolution removing Cassie Voss from the technology partnership's role is withdrawn, and I'd ask the minutes to note that the conduct it cited, specifically her initiative in surfacing vendor fraud, was correct and necessary. Second," he looked at Renata, "I'm exercising my voting interest to remove Dale Coburn from operations, effective immediately, pending the completion of an independent audit he will cooperate with in full." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The numbers were the numbers and the room knew it. The vote went the way the math demanded. When it was finished, Coburn had gone pale and quiet. 2 board members were already reaching for their phones. Renata sat at the head of the table she had run for 30 years, and the certainty she had walked in with was gone from her face, and what was underneath it was something Theo had not expected. Not anger, not contempt. Something older and more tired, like a woman who has been holding a wall up for so long she has forgotten there might not be anything behind it anymore. He would have stayed in the math of it if Cassie had not stood up. She stood at the far end of the table, and she looked at him with the expression she had been holding since he walked through the door. And it was not the expression he would have chosen for her to have. It was the expression of someone running numbers she did not want to reach the end of. She picked up the folder in front of her. She left the room. He found her in the hallway outside. "How long?" she said. 4 years. The full thing since the night after your mother's dinner. The conference wasn't a coincidence. No. The coffee shop. That was real, he said. Cassie, whatever else this is. The coffee shop was real. You had 44% of my family's company when you sat across from me and told me you needed me to trust you. Her voice was steady, which was the thing about her that always hurt the most, to be on the wrong side of. You said the way you handled it was going to depend on me. You made me feel like I was part of a choice. But the whole thing was already written. The audit was real. Handing you the report was real. I could have let Coburn keep going. I could have let you get buried in the fallout. I didn't. Because you still have feelings for me. Yes, that's not the same as being honest with me. He had no answer for that, because it was true, and he was done trying to find angles around true things. You're right, he said. It's not. I told myself I was protecting you by waiting. I was protecting myself. I was afraid that if you knew the whole thing, you'd walk out of the coffee shop and I'd have my revenge and nothing else. He looked at her directly. That was the coward's math, and I'm sorry for it. Cassie was quiet. Down the hall, someone's phone rang. A door opened and closed. What do you want to happen now? She asked. Theo reached into his jacket and took out a document he had asked David to prepare 2 days ago. After the coffee shop, after he had stopped pretending to himself that what happened in that room was the only thing he had come back for, he held it out to her. That's a proxy, he said. It transfers the full voting authority of my 44% to you. Not the ownership, I'll keep the debt position because it's the only thing standing between this company and a worse situation than me. But the votes. Every decision Voss Logistics makes from this point forward, it makes with your signature, not mine. She looked at the document. Why? Because I spent 4 years building the one thing with enough weight to lift what your mother had built over you, and I'm not going to pick it up and set it on your other shoulder. He held her eyes. I came back to take something from her. I don't want to give you a version of the same thing. She took the document. She read it. He watched her read it. You should have told me, she said. In the coffee shop. You should have trusted me to still be there on the other side of it. I know. I would have been. I know that now. He looked at the document in her hands. I'm telling you everything now. It's late, but it's everything. She signed it against the hallway wall with his pen without ceremony. She handed it back to him, and he handed it immediately to David, who had appeared at the end of the hallway with the specific timing of a good lawyer who knows when to be present and when to be invisible. Cassie leaned against the wall and looked at him. Not with the boardroom face, with the face he remembered from the coffee shop, from Forsyth Park, from 8 months of a life they had been building together 4 years ago before a woman with wine in her hand had decided what it was worth. My mother, she said. What happens to her? That depends on your mother, he said. Same answer as before. Renata Voss heard all of it. She had come out of the boardroom without anyone noticing and stood at the end of the hall. And she had heard the proxy and the apology, and the way her daughter had leaned against a wall and made a decision she did not ask anyone's permission for. She stood there for a long time after Theo said same answer as before, and the arithmetic she had lived by ran its final calculation and produced a number she did not recognize. She thought about a man named Gerald Sims, which was a name she had not said aloud in 20 years. Gerald Sims had been a business partner of her late father's, warm, smooth, excellent at handshakes. He had borrowed against the family's equity across the span of 3 years in amounts, small enough that no single transaction drew a second look. And by the time the Voss family understood what had happened, he was gone and the company was held together with borrowed time and family pride. Renata had spent the next decade rebuilding it inch by inch, and she had emerged from that decade with one lesson driven so deep she had stopped being able to feel its edges. A man who came from nothing was a man who had not yet decided what he would take. She had looked at Theo Bain 4 years ago and seen Gerald Sims's hands. She had been so certain. She had built the certainty into a wall and called the wall love. And she had just watched a man who could have taken everything, put it in her daughter's hands instead. Gerald Sims, when he left, had taken what the Voss family couldn't afford to lose. Theo Bain, standing in a hallway with 44% of the enterprise in his pocket, had handed it to Cassie and walked back. Renata did not say anything for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was the quietest it had been in 30 years. "I owe you an apology," she said to Theo. The words moved through her like something being extracted, slow and costly. "Not just for 4 years ago, for what I believed about you that made 4 years ago possible." She looked at her daughter and then back at him. "I was wrong. I have been wrong about you since the night I asked you to leave, and the proof of how wrong I was is standing in this hallway." Theo looked at her, the woman who had sent him down a driveway in November with nothing, who had looked at him and seen a threat where there was only a person. He thought about what he would have said to her in any of the 100 imagined versions of this moment. The sharp things, the costly things. He said none of them. "You built this company back from nothing once," he said. "That matters. That's real." And whatever else happened at that table, Cassie got her ability to stand in a room and hold her ground from somewhere, and it wasn't from a person without spine. He held Renata's eyes. "I'm not interested in erasing you. I'm interested in what comes next." Renata absorbed that. She was not a woman who knew how to receive that kind of thing gracefully, but she received it. 6 months later, the new operation structure was running cleanly. The Coburn audit had been completed. Its findings referred to the appropriate parties, and the financial gap it had revealed, patched through a combination of restructured terms that Theo's position allowed, and that Cassie negotiated herself, without asking anyone to do it for her. The 3 major accounts that had been quietly looking elsewhere had renewed. 2 of them expanded. Cassie ran the company with a directness that surprised people who had known the family for years, the kind of directness that comes from someone who has had to argue for every inch and has learned that the only solid ground is ground you verify yourself. Renata held a small advisory role, Cassie's idea. Theo had not lobbied for or against it, which had been its own kind of answer. Renata showed up to it the way someone shows up to a foreign country where they don't yet speak the language but have decided to learn. She was not graceful about it, but she showed up. On the evening of the 6-month mark, Theo and Cassie walked the Savannah waterfront the way he used to walk it alone when he was 20, and the river was the one free thing in the city. The water moved the way it always had, dark and unhurried, and the lights of the city lay across it in pieces. "You could have kept the votes," Cassie said. "Most people would have. I know. Why didn't you?" He thought about how to answer that honestly, which was the only way he answered things now. "I spent 4 years thinking the point was your mother," he said, taking back what she took, making the accounting come out right. He looked at the water, but the point was never the accounting. The accounting was just what I had to build to get back to the actual thing, which was. He took her hand, and there was nothing of the boardroom in it, nothing of the plan, nothing that needed to be managed or hidden or held in reserve. "You," he said. "It was always you. I just had to build something big enough to see that clearly." The river moved. The city held its shape around them, and for the first time since a November driveway 4 years ago, there was nothing between them and the future they were standing at the edge of but the choice to walk into it together, with their eyes open and their hands joined, and no one in the world left to tell them what they were worth.